and a good day to planet Earth. I'm joined by my good colleagues, Thaddeus McCotter, American Greatness in the great city of Detroit, Michigan, and Judy Dempsey of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in the globally significant city of Berlin. Good heavens. We begin this morning with an interview on the FT, my favorite European newspaper because I read English best without the Google translator, with Vladimir Zelensky at the 4-year mark of a war that is now described by both sides as a grind, the war in Ukraine or the war in Donbass. There is also the significant topic floating around the headlines of trade, because the administration, in the person of the president, has changed his mind again. It was before the Supreme Court decision X, after the Supreme Court decision Y, then again on the weekend Z. Now we're back to Y. And tomorrow's another day. Tonight's the State of the Union message. So the underlying theme here is the war in Europe is steady as she goes, and the trade war is anything you want on any given day. I come to you, Judy, because you observe from Europe this changing landscape. Zelensky saying 4 years and another one's coming unless something happens. And the trade negotiations, are they wearing down the European reader with the fact that there's nothing but uncertainty? The word that we fear more than any other in the U.S. is uncertainty. Do you feel it in Europe? Good day to you, Judy.
Good day, John, and hello to Dave. You know, there's a link between the vacillations and what the Trump administration is about trade. And with the fourth anniversary going into the 5th year of war, the Russian attack on Ukraine. And the link is this, that is the unpredictability which the Trump administration is doing about trade, on and off. He actually has tried to disown the Supreme Court. He's actually nearly victimized them. It shows he has no respect for the rule of law or trade issues or anything else, and is like a schoolboy thumped in the school ground. He's now said 10%, and as you said, now it's up to 15%. And the Europeans are saying they're taking a stand on this. Now, I say this is linked to the war in Ukraine because President Zelensky gave this very open interview. It could have been more open, interview with the Financial Times, and he gave one to Politico at the Munich Security Conference a week or so ago. And he actually said, America, understand, please, what is going on, what Russia's doing, and just stop trusting or believing that Russia is going to end this war. And so two things now: the Europeans no longer believe that President Trump is serious about negotiations, peace negotiations with Russia, nor do the Europeans believe anything that President Trump says about trade issues. The two are linked. One is a big foreign policy issue, one is a big global issue, and now the Europeans now have to wake up and actually take matters into their own hands when it comes to these two issues.
Thaddeus, we're going to start momentarily and record, but I wanted to ask you to give the audience a glimpse before we begin of what's going to happen tonight at the State of the Union message. You said in many of those, nearly part of this century. What is it like for members of Congress? How do you gather? What is the significance of sitting in the room? We're anticipating some drama tonight because the 9 black robes of the Supreme Court, I believe, will be right in front of the president's address. What's it like getting ready for the State of the Union, Thaddeus?
I think it's vastly different if you take your job seriously. From my point of view, it was less spectacle, and it was really a question of what is the agenda of the president, what are they planning on doing, how's it going to affect my constituents, how it's going to affect the country. So it was more of an informational gathering that really could have been done if they had just handed you the outline of the script in ahead of time. So I think a lot of that, to me, was always more spectacle than it was information, because a lot of it is they make these big statements and then 2 weeks later they're on to something else. So you have to keep that in mind. So for me, it was more of a workmanlike appearance, shall we say, than it was anything else. Now there was a certain aspect, first time to sit there in the, on the US floor of the House floor of the US House and see a State of the Union speech, which was very, very, very moving to an American, being given that privilege to sit there by your constituents. But after that, and even at the state level, with the state of the state and the state of the counties that I attended, again, it was more informational, even at that point in time. I needed to know what I was going to have to deal with down the road. And I think a lot of people should look at it that way.
The State of the Union in X number of hours anticipated, because of those Supreme Court justices sitting there, we're going to have more decisions over these next days from the court that may or may not evoke a similar unimpressive, enthusiastic, and rude reaction from the White House. We'll see. All right, we're going to begin. I propose to my colleagues that we begin with the matter of Zelensky and the war at 4 years, beginning the 5th. It's a grim situation. I believe the war is now longer than the first war, the Great War that tore apart the continents, and that we're still living with the consequences. So with your permission, I will begin the clock and we'll start formally. Thank you. 5. So Zelensky first, then trade. 5, 4, 3. This is the making of the John Batchelor Show. If you're watching us for the first time, that making, by that I use the reference to carrot soup. I don't know if that commits me to one kind of formula or another, but I'm turning the heat up. Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm John Batchelor. I welcome my colleague, Thaddeus McCutter, American Greatness, my co-host and friend from the great city of Detroit, Michigan. And we're joined by Judy Dempsey of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, a senior scholar. She is in Berlin. We turn immediately to a major interview with Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, at the 4-year mark of a tragedy, the war in Donbass, the war in Ukraine. And Mr. Zelensky's remarks are both sturdy but desperate, talking about missiles that can strike deep into Russia, talking about the Europeans. I believe the term he used was prevaricating about their commitment to Ukraine, demanding immediate entry into the EU, demanding immediate end of the war, not a ceasefire, an end of the war. Judy, I begin with you because the war is so much closer to you in Berlin than it ever could be to me here in New England. The war has become normative. The war has become somewhere down the front page. The war has become not talked about. At 4 years, how would you characterize the European treatment of the war tragedy? Good day to you.
Good day, John, and thanks for having me on your show, John. The Europeans, led by Germany and France and Great Britain and Poland and the Baltic states, have really held firm vis-a-vis Ukraine. What is extremely sad and very depressing is how Hungary and Slovakia, members of NATO, members of the EU, are blocking a 90 billion credit line, a 90 billion euro credit line to Ukraine, plus extension of sanctions, because they want Ukraine to facilitate the flow of Russian energy to Slovakia and Hungary. This is in the middle of a war where so many people have been killed. And it is quite depressing that 2 EU member states can hold the European Union ransom to this. This is the first thing. Secondly, I think the big countries are holding very, very firm. I think also for the basic reason is that they can no longer believe that the Trump administration will continue to support Ukraine, not even militarily, but politically. The flip side is that given the state of European defence, Europeans have to buy so much of their kit from the Americans in order to supply Ukraine. This costs an awful lot of money. That being said, Europeans are still absolutely behind Ukraine, and they have no more illusions now about Russia, nor do they have any illusions about the Trump administration's attitude towards President Putin's so-called negotiations to end this war.
That is, you have a comment and a question for Judy, please.
Just a question for Judy. Is there talk in the EU about how to end this stalemate, about taking the initiative in terms of preventing the continuing grind and the death and the carnage that is occurring?
It's out there, but very, very quiet at the moment. And I think it's not articulated and it's not public because because most European member states are absolutely shocked and disgusted with how Putin has treated Ukraine, particularly now. Forget about the last 4 years. We're going into the 5th year with just bombing of the infrastructure, the civilian infrastructure and the energy grids and so on. But at the end of the day, the Europeans will have to come up with some kind of strategy towards Russia, but actually it's not on the cards at the moment. What's on the cards at the moment is to continue giving the amount of support to Ukraine and continue to ramp up the sanctions on Russia. And actually some of the sanctions are beginning to work actually. But this is a big issue, but for the moment the Europeans are still holding the line vis-a-vis Ukraine because they know what's at stake. If Ukraine loses, Europe loses.
So if I can then, Judy, so it's really right now they're viewing this as one is going to win, one is going to lose. It's a binary choice, or are they looking to see if there's a potential off-ramp to stop the killing at this point?
It's a very important question. I mean, stopping the killing is so necessary. The losses have been extraordinary on both sides, and we don't know the real extent of the losses on the Russian side, nor indeed on the Ukrainian side. Some of these are actually secret, as you know. But at the moment, the Europeans, I think there's a kind of emotional reflex that they don't want to discuss the idea of peace at the moment because Russia is not sincere about wanting peace. And while Zelensky, in his interview with the Financial Times, said, yes, he's willing to talk to President Putin, yes, he's willing to have peace, but the Europeans want to know, well, fine, we'll support you on this, but what sort of peace? And the problem is that while Ukraine has set its own red lines, of course, with eastern parts of Ukraine, Russia set no red lines whatsoever because he wants to actually make sure that Ukraine doesn't survive as an independent, sovereign country.
The quotes from Mr. Zelensky, Russians are playing games. He goes on to say, I see it because they are very poor actors. They are playing with Trump and playing with the entire world. That's how it is. Putin thinks he looks convincing and that he can be trusted. No, he is a bad actor. Judy, we're looking at a situation where there can be no resolution because the Kremlin is untrustworthy, and therefore anything they promise is meaningless. A false Russia. Does that mean this is now a conflict that must deal with that fact, that we can't tidy up the Ukraine war and say all is okay in Europe? We've got a long road ahead of us.
The war could be tidied up, as you describe it, if the administration in the United States changes attitude. And that's the bottom line, frankly.
Well, that by changing an attitude, you mean changing a president, because you're not going to get a different president out of Donald Trump.
It would depend. I mean, we have seen some of the Republicans, but Lindsey Graham and the others have been so disappointing, and they say one thing privately and then what they do publicly. But actually, the United States, even under Joe Biden, and Joe Biden lost an incredible opportunity to really push the envelope and give Ukraine the advantage. And he didn't give the Ukraine the necessary advantage. And now President Trump has taken it away. Unless there is a sea change in the Republicans, which I doubt it, the Europeans are on their own to actually give Ukraine the push that they might need to give them the advantage with negotiations. I don't see it happening at the moment, but we will see what happens in Germany.
Thaddeus, your comment on the Republican Party, is it movable on the matter of this quandary of Ukraine?
Well, I think the question that Zelensky raises is problematic for anybody, be it the EU or be it the United States. If Russia's a bad actor that cannot be trusted, it doesn't matter if it's the EU engaging him or if the US is engaging Russia, they can't be trusted. So what Zelensky is really kind of arguing is that there is no ability to deal with Russia in terms of negotiation. It has to be, he wants more arms so that he can try to win the war on the ground, which I don't think is realistic at this point. So I think that when the United States looks at this, then what you need is somebody like Zelensky to actually say, look, we have to deal with Russia. They have to work with the EU to find out what will be acceptable to Ukraine, to the EU, to everybody who opposes Russian aggression. What would be a potential off-ramp for this? But there has never been any consensus as to this in any quarter, be it the EU, be it Zelensky or the United States. So at this point, you're still stuck in the stalemate.
Judy, let's go to the one leader who commands authority because of the industrial power of Germany. Chancellor Merz, does he describe singly what he wants in Ukraine? Does he say, this is what we want?
John, Chancellor Merz uses the language what the French president does, what the British Prime Minister does, and supports supports Ukraine holding on to its independence and its territorial integrity and other issues as well. But Chancellor Merz does hold the key in terms of supplying certain weapons and ammunition, but political and financial support to Ukraine. And Germany hasn't wavered on this. They could supply much more on this. Maybe this will be a key, but there's no doubt about it that the German attitude towards Russia has fundamentally changed.
That is, at the 5th year of the war, will we still be talking about these topics?
Again, unless you can find a consensus for a negotiating point amongst the allies against Russia and have leadership to drive it, no one has identified what will be a potential solution that would be trusted. If you bring a solution to Zelensky, he says Russia's a bad actor. How do you know that he would even be willing to get on board with it? There has to be consensus for an off-ramp and in terms of negotiations, and we've yet to see a consensus building amongst the people who oppose the Russian aggression. I mean, well, Judy, if you think there is one, I'd be more than happy to hear.
But today we're talking in reasonable terms of a consensus and what might happen. This war's not unreasonable, and Russia's war in Ukraine, as most wars are about conquest. And the Europeans, and regardless of who's in the White House, have to recognize that this is a war of conquest being undertaken by Russia. And if the Europeans and the Americans actually go down this road of a war of conquest, there's actually no stopping this element. We are back to the Second World War.
So if I can, and
go with conquest.
If I can, and John will back me up on this, I have loathed Vladimir Putin for decades now. For decades. Okay, I understand he's a former lieutenant colonel of the KGB. I loathe communists. I loathe Vladimir Putin. The problem is what you're saying is that there has to be a on-the-ground military victory to stop Russian aggression. And I'm telling you, that's where we are today. And I don't know that you can arm Ukraine enough without risking World War III to accomplish that. I think that's the way a lot of people here in the U.S. view this. We would love to see Putin lose, but we don't know if that's feasible at this point.
You and I are on the sharing the same table intellectually on all of this, and we don't want Russia to win under President Putin. Of course, we don't. But the issue is under what circumstances do you actually bring Russia to the table? And actually, Russia might be brought to the table if Ukraine is given the kind of military opportunity to push Russia a bit further. maybe I'm skeptical. You read all the reports on the ground in Russia and the propaganda, the social media, and the misinformation, the censorship and so on. And, the Russians don't know what's going on. Of course they know what's going on. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers are not coming back. They're dead. And the interesting question is why the Russian, leaving aside the Russian elites, the Russians themselves are saying enough is enough. And you can't keep blaming the censorship on all of this. It's something fundamental that Putin is pushing this as far as possible, but I'm not so sure this is sustainable anymore.
Judy Dempsey in Berlin, Thaddeus McCutter, Detroit, Michigan. A few moments on trade, and we're anticipating the president's remarks, State of the Union. I'm John Batchelor. I'm John Batchelor with my colleagues, Judy Dempsey in Berlin for the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Thaddeus McCutter in Detroit, Michigan for American Greatness. We're told by the Wall Street Journal that the president looks to sell the economy to the American people for the State of the Union address. Sell the economy. The unhappiness with the Trump administration is evident in a poll taken over the weekend by ABC and the Washington Post. What was surprising to me is the worst marks are for the economy, not for the war, not for the changeable nature of the rhetoric out of Washington, sometimes rude, sometimes incoherent. No, but for the economy, for inflation, for the very things that elected Donald Trump. So what we're looking at here is a State of the Union message where the president is going to be imploring, perhaps chastising the American people that we don't appreciate how good we have it. That is, how good do we have it?
The three of us are doing okay. But look, well, honestly, John, to a certain extent, we've seen this over and over. This is a cycle that both parties do. They inherit a mess, and then they talk about the mess they inherited, and they talk about how they're going to fix it. And either they do or they don't, because there has to be palpable benefits to the American people in terms of prosperity. The Trump administration, to a certain extent, has not followed FDR's advice, which is to continually point back and say, look, they created the mess, we're trying to fix it. Instead, he's kind of jumped around. People care more about the green in their pocket than they do about Greenland right now in the United States. The polls are all showing that. There has not been a disciplined messaging about the economy, about how they're going to fix it. There's not been enough of a palpable benefit to the American people in their pocketbooks for them to think, okay, we're making progress. And there hasn't even been enough blaming of the Democrats for creating the mess in the first place. So now he's kind of a captive of his own failure to have a disciplined message at this point. And the State of the Union is going to go a long way. And we've all seen reports where they're huddled up to try to figure out how to get the state of the economy into the State of the Union and have it put forward. But even if that happens, John, is there going to be a continuous push on the economy to show that affordability and the things Americans care about, like inflation, are being at the forefront of this administration? Or is there going to be a whole lot of other issues that continue to pop up, things like hockey teams and things and so forth? So I'm very skeptical that they can show a united front in terms of messaging that will actually do anything. And that's setting aside the fact that you have to pass legislation to make a lot of these changes permanent, or at least as permanent as a statute can make them, as opposed to an executive order. So,
Judy, I give you a fact that Thaddeus is underlining. The polling says that 60% of the American people do not approve of Donald Trump. Does Europe hear that? Do you know that we're voting with you?
The Europeans will vote for anything that will actually give some predictability with regard to the White House administration. But I find today's comments really very, very interesting, because he says, will there be disciplined messaging? Well, there certainly wasn't any disciplined messaging at the Davos, the big Davos meeting last January, where Trump went all over the place. Secondly, blaming Democrats, it's too late. I mean, he's been in office for 2 years now. You can't keep blaming the Democrats the whole time, and the Democrats really didn't do that badly in the economy. Thirdly, which I find very interesting, is among Republicans, especially those in Townsend and areas, the whole role of artificial intelligence, what it's doing to energy, what it's doing to the infrastructure, what it's doing to areas that they have to build up to provide this huge kind of energy infrastructure for these billionaires. And Tadeusz, this is the fourth point, which I'd be very interested to see what you think on this. The billionaires. I mean, they're just reeking it in and calling home the shots and everything, getting richer and richer. And the affordability issue is actually out there. I don't know how Trump is going to address this. And if Trump doesn't address this, it's something that President Putin doesn't either address, the whole shambles of the economy.
That is, we have a couple of minutes. Go ahead.
Just a historical footnote. FDR ran against the Republican economy in the crash got him elected for 4 terms. He did okay.
The malefactors of wealth.
Yes, the malefactors of wealth, Martin, Barton, and Fish, and all that.
Yes.
So in the final analysis, though, a lot of the issue is we're not going to tax our way into prosperity. I don't think punishing the rich people. Look, I'm not a fan of billionaires. I'm a populist myself. But the reality is, you have to thread the needle to make sure that populism actually accomplishes what your end goal is going to be. I think, Judy, you're right. Artificial intelligence is one of the key things that we have to look at. The job losses, the dislocation. When they were doing the globalization with the outsourcing of American manufacturing jobs, because they were lower middle class, they were working class people, it was harder for them to express their anger, their outrage, and to have things change. But that venom was still, that righteous anger was still seething underneath. It led to populist movements that are still continuing today in both the Republican and the Democratic Party. What I'm worried about is when that hits the white collar worker, and that starts to take away those jobs, what kind of dislocations and disruptions are we going to see societally?
Judy Dempsey, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Berlin. That is McCotter, American Grace in Detroit, Michigan. I'm John Batchelor. And we can continue, but that is recorded for this evening. My comment about State of the Union is it is not strong, not even close to strong right now. We did not mention, but there it is. A fleet off of Iran to do what? To accomplish what? And Thaddeus, Field Marshal Levin apparently has inspired the president with a video from Fox, for heaven's sakes. I learned this morning that the president is following the recommendation of a TV star.
Oh. I think the question has been, we discussed this maybe yesterday. Is the fleet there for negotiation, to leverage a negotiation, or is it there for military action? I think it's there to leverage a negotiation. I think we've seen that at this point. At least that's the latest report, but we'll never know.
Yeah.
Until it happens.
Two things, John. The Iranian issue, although it has changed a little, the Israeli pressure is huge, but Netanyahu's visit to the White House was not a huge success. The fact that it wasn't a huge success and there wasn't a big photo thingy bob afterwards does suggest that we're not quite sure where Trump is going on Iran, firstly. Secondly, I have an idea for next thing. The middle, Tadeusz, you mentioned the middle classes, how it's going to fight for white collar, how it's going to affect with AI. How on earth is the war affecting the so-called oligarchs and middle classes in Russia? I mean, they've been touched with their wallets, with travel, with sanctions and everything. And there's a very strange, not comparison, but look at the white collar in the US and the absolute decimation of what's happening to the entrepreneurial and white collar in Russia. Anyway, I shall leave it there. I just find the whole thing both fascinating and depressing, and the Europeans better step up, and they're not going to do it yet.
Judy, we look to you next week, and this hour is best for us if you can maintain it.
It's perfect, as long as it's not too early for my great Detroit colleague. It's really nice. It's really nice, this format, actually. He's getting very cheeky with me now, so I better be on my guard.
Oh, that is the old country in him, I think.
Okay.
Yes, we're from Antrim County originally.
Yeah, okay.
Money, yeah, that might explain my feistiness.
I don't mind that. It's great. Okay, thank you as ever, both of you.
And
Thank you, John. Thank you
thank
today.
you, Judy. And we'll see you in a week's time after
Definitely.
Trump has changed his mind 5 more times.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. My measure of the Iran story is that the wise thing to do is to call the fleet home. There's no winning this. The mullahs have decided to take the war. I think that's called bluff calling.
Well, we'll see. If it is, then he'll have to make a decision at that point.
When the FT reported that the president was showing a video of how to go forward from Mark Levin, for God's sakes, that is.
Well, some of that. A lot of what we see, look, this is still the same media that brought us the Russiagate lie that Devin Nunes helped uncover. So let us not forget that a lot of this stuff gets placed and a lot of this stuff is disinformation. A lot of it could be accurate, but we don't know at this point. This president, more than anything else, if nothing else, will show the links that the media will go to undermine a Republican president. I mean, this is Bush on steroids, what they did to him.
Is he a Republican president?
He was elected by the Republican Party, so he's a Republican president. He certainly represents some of the populist wing of the Republican Party, the old Tea Party segments. He has brought in a lot of the Reform Party, but this is the Republican Party. The Republican Party nominated him through primaries and through caucuses and at the convention. In fact, he's won every time he's run within the Republican Party. That's just a statement of fact.
Okay.
Sorry to disappoint.
Well, the polling doesn't reflect the strength at the primary level.
But it shows that he's a president with a struggling economy at this point and hasn't articulated a consistent path forward that shows people that there's optimism, and it would have it any president at this point in time that engaged in the same kind of self-inflicted wounds.
All right, let's be practical then. It's picking a fight with the Federal Reserve, then picking a fight with the Supreme Court, then picking a fight with the U.S. military. Is that a winning hand?
Well, it depends on what you mean by picking a fight with the military. I mean, he is the commander in chief. He is responsible for the U.S. Armed Forces. And so trying to make sure that they're fit and ready to go is his job. I don't know that I would engage in fighting with certain people like the Federal Reserve, which is semi-independent, some of these things. But I'm not going to defend or excuse any self-inflicted wounds. They are what they are. And as we see, he will struggle because of it. You just have to have a certain amount of discipline. I think one of the issues is the base loves. We've said this, we've talked about this before, John. He's very lucky in his enemies. The problem is sometimes the one enemy that's the worst for him is when he becomes his own worst enemy. And when he says things or he goes off message or he chases tangential things that the American people don't care about. And even people close to him have talked about that. But in the final analysis, it's either going to work, the policies are going to work, or they're not. And right now, American people don't feel that the policies are working for them. And if they do work for them, his numbers will go up. If they don't work for them, the numbers will go down.
And you believe that that is possible between now and November 3rd to go up?
Oh, yeah. I believe if you can pass some laws, if you can make sure that the laws that are in place are done, if you can show that there is a path forward, yes, certainly. If 24 hours is a lifetime in politics. If you go back and you look at some of the things we've seen, go back to the Obama years, the Bush years, even the first George Bush, you could be riding on top. And the next thing you know, it always comes back to the economy.
Yes, I agree with that.
Tip O'Neill, all politics is local.
Yes, I agree with you.
Starts around the kitchen table, like Ronald Reagan said. And if people around the kitchen table are worried about the cost of food, you're going to lose. It is that simple.
Yes.
Common sense. I know people get paid a lot of money to talk about how sophisticated and nuanced politics is, and that makes them rich. It's all very simple. It's very commonsensical. Talk about what people care about and try to fix it. And you'll get reelected, maybe you won't. I have no greater insight than that. after all these years.
I am not given any of my conversations that I have with economists. I'm not given to understand that there's turning around the economy. The Federal Reserve has a mission, and that's to fight inflation, and it will continue, whether it's Powell or his replacement. And there's not enough time between now and November to convince the American people that the Federal Reserve is the problem.
Well, I'm not even talking about the Federal Reserve. It's it's either the policies that are in place are either going to work or not. And the Federal Reserve, I don't know that they necessarily have to cut interest rates to grow the economy. I think people are very concerned about that. And if inflation starts to go down, that actually helps this administration, doesn't it, John?
I don't. Well, put me down as completely confused by this administration.
Well, I'm not saying that I'm not saying it's probable. I'm saying it's possible. And it will take a lot of work, and it will take a lot of discipline, and it will take a lot of people doing their jobs.
What I hear, Thaddeus, is that the president has lost the attention of a great number of decision makers.
Did he ever have their attention? Certainly, they didn't have the support of a lot of these types of decision makers. He was elected to change things.
In January of 25, he did have the attention, but the fickleness of his policies over the last year has made it unwise to listen closely to him.
I don't know that he's particularly different than he was the first time. And I don't know why they would expect him to be any different than he was in the first term.
Well,
so if they had different assumptions, that's really kind of on them. Look, love him or hate him, he is very consistent in his inconsistencies.
Yes. Although I do not recall, perhaps you do, that he campaigned on Liberation Day. He did not.
He's always talked about how the United States was getting cheated in the globalized economy, and this was one way that he wanted to deal with it. Now, it is Republican. It's certainly since McKinley's administration, post McKinley, we have talked about tariffs were the bogeyman. You can't go anywhere near tariffs, and so it became Republican orthodoxy. But Trump is there because much of the Republican base is tired of Republican orthodoxy, and they were tired, especially the blue collars were very upset about being played for suckers in the globalized economy. And they viewed tariffs as one of the reasons that they could try to get back at the people who took their jobs and the outsourcing and maybe insource some jobs in the future. Now, you can say that's right or wrong, but that has been part of Republican orthodoxy since the McKinley administration anyways. And it became Democratic orthodoxy throughout later parts of the 20th century, Dick Gephardt and others. And Trump just latched onto it and brought it to the fore within the Republican Party again. So what's old is new. Now, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I think I would have taken a more targeted approach, and I would have based a lot of it upon national security, especially the decoupling with the communist Chinese, and left Europe alone at this point in time. I would have prioritized it in that case, but he decided he's going to go across the board as a president who can't run again. He figured his time was now. I would again disagree with the overarching nature of what he did. Again, done it more targeted. I can't really say to any blue collar worker in Detroit that their support for tariffs is inherently wrong against people who may have been getting a better deal out of us through international trade than they deserved.
The anecdotes don't support your case, that is. The anecdote said that tariffs are a tax on the American people.
If they wind up paying it, and it depends. Look, the anecdote is I got guys all over my neighborhood that lost their jobs because of manufacturing losing. I've got parts that look like ghost towns. Okay, so those aren't anecdotes; those are people, John. They don't live out in New England. They may not have gone to Yale. They might not have gone to some of the Ivy Leagues, and they might have a high school education, but their jobs are gone, and they don't know what they're going to do. And it's been like this for decades, and nobody cared until Donald Trump came. And that's why he got that kind of momentum in the primaries, because he's one of the few people who cared, and this was something that he was certainly going to do. And whether it's going to work or not, we shall see. But the United States' overarching foreign policy has allowed people we basically subsidized many of the economies throughout the world. The Marshall Plan wasn't the only part. That was a one-term shot in the arm. The rest of it was allowing people unfettered access to the United States markets. And by the way, I did like to add this. We were also told back when I was in high school, we're moving towards from a productive economy to a service economy. Now we're moving to an AI economy. How's that going to work now for anybody?
All that is important to address. I'm going to stay with tariffs. They're not working. The New York Fed's report is 90% of the tariffs are being paid by the American people. I can be very specific about anecdotes that I take. The tariffs are a direct tax on the consumer of the United States of America.
Then
No.
inflation would go up. Then the price of everything would be going up because of the tariffs, and the inflation would be going up because of the inflated cost of goods, right?
Not only.
Right.
No.
But inflation would be going up on the tariffed items, right?
It discourages consumption, which is the driver of the economy.
Well, you had December was pretty good in terms of consumption, wasn't it?
It was adequate. It was not the direction we're going. I'm repeating things I've been told. I'm not an economist.
Well, if Trump's wrong on the tariffs, then everything, ironically, then the repeal of the tariffs, the rejection of the tariffs by the Supreme Court would play into the Republicans actually helping them.
It would if there was time. I don't have a judgment of the time, but I'm told there's not time.
I think there's time, and I don't know that the policies, that the tariffs were going to be the driving cause.
No, I don't think that's driving. I don't make that case. I think the American people will vote, as they always do at the midterm, at first opportunity. They will vote against the White House. That is history. And therefore, I don't think any of this swings on tariffs. I'm talking about tariffs being the wrong direction because of the tax. Raising taxes is impractical.
Well, it's not a tax. You can call it a tax. It's not a tax. It's not a tax. If you don't buy it, you're not being taxed. You could argue that they're paying the cost to them ultimately, because if it's passed on down by the companies down to the consumers, you could do that. If you're in a competitive economy, a lot of times the companies will eat that cost themselves. All right, but it's not necessarily a tax where you have no choice. They're going to tax you whether you buy a product, whether you use a product or not.
A manufacturer in Ohio who makes pillows and blankets with goose feathers. He wants to know, where does he go to get his 1.63 million returned to him that he had to pay and that are now regarded as illegal or unconstitutional? Where do I go? How do I get the money back? That was in the Wall Street Journal 2 days ago. What is the answer? The administration is not offering an answer.
Well, that's up to them to have an answer if they're going to have to pay that. So they're going to have an answer.
Well, they by inference,
and that would be a heck of an injection back into we talk about Keynesian economy, jumping that back into the economy.
A very specific example: a purchase from a store in San Francisco with a French franchise for pillows, and the pillows were decorative pillows, $150 each. But rather than ship them from San Francisco to the consumer in Washington, they shipped them from France, from the mothership. The pillows arrive, they're paid for, $300 for decorative pillows. And then the announcement comes to the consumer from the Customs and Border Patrol, pay this tariff and we'll deliver your pillows. The tariff was $210 on $300 pillows. Single anecdote, doesn't mean anything, but it certainly indicates that things are not going well.
It means that they sell some pretty expensive pillows in San Francisco. Yep. The problem, I'm not a tariff guy, but I also support targeted tariffs, especially in terms of national security. So the argument you're trying to make is, let's say, then we'll never be able to address the communist Chinese cheating of the United States. We'll never be able to use tariffs as a weapon in our arsenal to try to decouple and defang them from their unfair trade practices.
I think
So then they will be removed from the quiver then, because you will be accused of taxing every time the American people if you do anything to the Chinese goods.
I think the supply chain is part of the answer as well. We're not addressing that. I'm repeating that, as you know.
I know, and I know this Wall Street orthodoxy and Wall Street Journal orthodoxy and some Republican orthodoxy, especially as you climb up toward the 1%. I'm just telling you, the reality is the people in the blue collar that have lost their jobs are not concerned about that. They want to see something done against the people who took their jobs, put them overseas, and did something about it. And that's what this is as a political matter. Now, if we want to go into the policy matters, we can talk ad infinitum, whether they're good, whether they're bad, whether they work, whether they won't. But that's just what's driving this, and which is why he believes that he has to continue to drive them, because he believes a large part of the MAGA GOP blue collar base supports him on this.
The polls don't support that conclusion. The Wall Street Journal puts it this way: the president is expected to argue that the country is, quote, strong, prosperous, and respected as it enters its 250th year. In other words, he's going to sell us that we feel better than we're acting.
So the polls, when you say the polls don't show that, is that a poll on tariffs, or is it that's what 40% still love the president?
60% disapprove.
Okay, but when I talk about a large segment of his base, the part that got him elected within the Republican Party is blue collar, is the old Tea Party. So that they're still supporting him.
57% disapprove on the basis of inflation.
And how many of those people are in that base that I just talked about?
1/3.
No, or maybe 1/3. Yeah, the Orthodox Republicans have voted for him in a binary choice.
Right. That's
and he's made a decision that within the battle between the Orthodox Republicans and his new MAGA GOP blue collar base, he's going to stick with the people who brought him to the dance. Look, it's just reality. I mean, I'm not arguing it's good or bad. I'm just telling you what they're thinking.
Well, I'm arguing that it's not a winner.
Well, that isn't something you may well be right, and we'll know in November. And as you know, I'm not always the most sanguine individual you're ever going to run across.
Well, and we can anticipate that the last 2 years of a lame duck president are not successful. That is tradition, especially given a midterm. Well, you went through the midterm of 2006. You know how bad it became in 2007.
Yeah. And it wasn't a picnic in 2008 either.
And you had Rove out there telling you were wrong all up to the vote in November of 2006. I remember routinely he would chastise you members of the House because you were discouraged.
I don't know how much we cared about him at the time. I mean, he would say that, he could chastise us all he wanted. It's not how that place worked. Because Carl wasn't on the ballot, man. We were. We knew what was going on.
And you had a leader, Boehner, at the time, who I believe was telling you that you should all get on board and not be discouraged, despite the polls. And Pelosi was leading the charge on the other side, and she was raised as the worst possible choice for the road ahead. It didn't stop the momentum.
You have to remember 2006, you saw the insurgency in Iraq was starting to really, really cause casualties in the U.S.
Right.
I think it was the Iraq summer that the left painted it. You had the economy was sputtering in places like Michigan where we get sicker quicker. You knew something bad was going to happen. Not only did the Great Deflation happen by 2008, you also saw the auto industry collapse in large part because of that. So you had you basically were losing on the issues of war and peace. I don't know how you're going to keep your majority in a midterm on that basis.
And you didn't think you would. I recall our conversations.
But what Boehner was trying to do, which would make sense, he was different than Rove. It was kind of like if you think you're going to lose, you're going to lose. So you got to do. It's almost like a team. You have to go to the finish. If you think you're going to lose, you will lose. And so it was a question of we were not optimistic about it. Remember, you had the Foley issue come down the pike right at the end of 2006. That was the coup de grace. And so then I think there was a couple of weeks left. And so then at that point, you were basically stuck with, all right, how bad is the defeat going to be? How bad is the loss going to be? The other part of it is Rahm Emanuel was chair of the DCC. He had spent a little time as a rep from Illinois before he became mayor of Chicago. And Rahm was a very cagey politician. He did something that I think was very astute. He said, so-and-so Republican is a rubber stamp for George Bush, vote Democrat and send George Bush a message. And it's a true story. There's a friend of mine in another targeted seat like myself. And he came back from his district after the recess in August. And he said, he was talking to an independent outside one of his town halls. And the independent said, I think you've done a great job, but I have to vote against you. And my friend said, why? And he said, I have to send George Bush a message. If this becomes that type of message election, Republicans are in deep, deep trouble if Donald Trump's popularity remains where it is today. And I hope nobody's listening to take me up on that.
I listened to you in 2006 and you were right. I thought it was about war fighting. It was not.
No, it was.
As I recall, he came out State of the Union in 2005 after the re-elect and said he was going to challenge Social Security. Was that a factor in 2006?
It didn't help. But there was they had a plethora of issues. Again, when you're not delivering on war and peace, you don't have a lot to run on. And so by 2006, I remember in 2006, people were like, I'm sure Karl Rove has found those weapons of mass destruction, and I'm sure he's going to pull them out, and it's going to save us. And a lot of us were like, I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't think if he'd have found weapons of mass destruction, I'm sure he would have brought them out a lot sooner. Yeah, so, they didn't.
All right. The case is made, and the president will speak to it tonight. Is he going to mock the court?
Oh, I think Joe Biden did it.
Yeah.
Before.
And Obama.
FDR really started the whole thing. If you go all the way back with the switching time saves 9 and all the court packing. I would argue that the only good thing that would come of that is it does remind us that we have 3 separate equal branches of government. And the way that the Supreme Court will just look at the president and go, well, that's not very nice. Okay, let's move forward. Because they don't answer to the president. They're their own separate equal branch of government. And that's heartening. It's good to know that we still have 3 separate equal branches of government. Now it's time for Congress to do their job.
This morning, we're going to likely get a decision on the independent boards. The Tuesday and Wednesday were the next releases. And that was the next, that's the one, Slaughter versus Trump, firing of the FTC chair, Slaughter, and the Lisa Cook story at the Fed.
Yeah, there is an issue that I find that is fascinating, is how Congress can create an entity that no one oversees, basically.
Yeah, yes.
I mean, we are a representative, a free republic with democracy. How do you do that? How do you divorce the public from something, the administrative state writ large? No one controls it. Our elected officials cannot create things that no one can control.
You're asking the question FDR asked in 1935. And the answer from the court was because, and that was it.
That's very helpful. Very helpful. That's some great legal theory right there. Sounds more like parenting.
Well, the decision is probably this morning. We'll see at 10. Thaddeus, thank you very much. We kept duty to the 8 a.m. if that's agreeable with you next week.
Oh, I won't be here next week.
Oh, that's right. You're away.
Yeah, I'll be away and fighting for tariffs. I'm kidding, of course.
Yeah. Well, have you seen the number of applications for refunds? They're enormous.
They're gonna be shooting through the roof. Oh yeah. Did you try to buy one of those San Francisco pillows, John?
No,
okay.
It's not my. but I did buy Milwaukee machine tools all during this period, and
Really?
I was confident. Milwaukee, the maker,
Oh,
Milwaukee,
yeah.
and I had a contractor who introduced me to Milwaukee tools. And Thaddeus, I have no skills whatsoever, but my father did. So in buying the tools, I feel closer to him, even though I don't know how to use them. It's quite a joy.
Well,
And I made sure every purchase, and Milwaukee is good about this, made in America, every one.
well, from Detroit to Milwaukee to you. Congratulations, John.
Thank you, Thaddeus. And I'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
We'll
And
start
thank
fitting you for a blue collar.
no, a supporter of, but not. I don't know how to use those tools. Thank you. And here comes the music by Roman until 23 hours from now when we have some answers about State of the Union. Thank you, Thaddeus.